legislative council person will lead off with an introductory of the task force report, and then we'll switch over to co-chairs Dan Smith or myself will fill in behind. So Michael, will give you the floor and you can lead off with a little overview.
Okay, so I won't screen share the entire document. I will just give an overview and then Dan can get into the specifics. So during the 2020 legislative session, the General Assembly, in response to concerns regarding the vitality and viability of the Vermont dairy industry, and specifically the increasing loss of farms, establish a task force to revitalize the Vermont dairy industry. And that task force did two things, or that law did two things. It first required the Department of Financial Regulation to review and assess the long-term sustainability of Vermont dairy farming under the existing federal milk marketing order pricing system, current market conditions, and dairy cooperative operation. And then once DFR issued that report, a task force would be established to develop legislation to revise dairy pricing and other market regulation in the state to improve the viability of Vermont dairy farming. So DFR did a report. It's a pretty extensive report. You received testimony on that report as a committee last year, specifically from Jill Rickard, who was the primary author of the report. The department concluded that the Vermont dairy industry is struggling, primarily as a result of the imbalance between high cost of production and low federal milk market order minimum prices, but also compounded by COVID-19. DFR concluded that changes to the federal milk market order could help ensure better prices for Vermont farmers. In addition, DFR asserted it's worth considering efforts to supplement the market order through risk management programs or state milk pricing, but they did not specifically recommend a state milk pricing program. So after the DFR report, there was a little bit of delay in getting the appointments to the task force, but the task force was appointed and had its first meeting May 3rd, 2021. It's held 10 meetings. It's heard from multiple witnesses. I think the final count was around 44 people, actually 53 people.
Yeah, 50.
Representing all facets of the agricultural economy, farmers themselves, conventional and organic, the processors, the major processors, and frankly, it wasn't just some low-level representative from the major processors. You got the higher ups in Danone, higher ups in Organic Valley, the significant representation from the processors. Then there was testimony from agricultural insurance industry, and there was also testimony from a significant number of I don't know how to say this, but just interested parties. And the task force sifted through potential actions. They have agreed on multiple recommendations in about 7 different categories. And I'm not sure where I should stop, Co-Chair Smith, with regard to what you're going to outline in your presentation and what I should go forward with.
I guess, Mike, with a little bit of tag team would be my suggestion. Let me kind of come in a little bit behind what you said, and I can tee up the next part on specifics of what's in the
Okay.
report.
Sure.
So,
So-
good morning, everybody, and Happy New Year. This would be the first presentation of the task force report, so hopefully you have a little understanding if it's a little ragged around the edges, because you're the first go through. So Linda, do you want to put up I put together a little bit of a slideshow. So next page. To just kind of formalize a little bit what Mike described, I would just add that in the backdrop, Roger and I came before you folks in February to talk about state price regulation front and center based on our research that showed the Vermont industry had been completely transformed from what it had been historically, shipping milk out of state to the Boston fluid market. And there was a lot of discussion. It's a lot of information and a lot, plain and simple. And after the discussion back and forth, the committee came up with the idea of asking DFR to do a report to look into the issues that we had raised and that had been discussed. And as Mike said, out of that came a directive to DFR and to the task force to look into the sustainability of Vermont dairy farming, given where federal milk market order pricing is, and also to look into the viability of doing something at the state level with regard to price. So if you look at my title, I think it's quite important to really take note of what happened between when we first started talking about this as regular business and what's gone on in between. So, Roger and I make a presentation, you folks get together and come up with the idea of a task force. The task force specifically directed to come up with legislation, so it's not a study committee, and also to have DFR do a report. So that's a lot of really good basic process. And then under regular order, DFR submits the report. The task force begins its work and the task force makes a presentation. That's kind of a lineal legislative progression. Next slide, Linda. But in the middle of what we were doing, two things really happened. First, the pandemic throws everything up in the air. Then in addition to that, this tremendous amount of money is going to be made available by the federal government to deal with a lot of issues that surfaced during the testimony. So, what we had started out to do in a lineal progression, which was look at really whether the state can intervene in the price regulation dynamic that's problematic for dairy farms. I wouldn't say it went completely up in the air, but it went a little bit sideways. And the task force attention really was diverted to both the impact of the pandemic as well as the availability of the federal money, and how can we put together a package of proposals that takes best advantage of the opportunity, this once in a generation opportunity for federal funding to address the structural issues on farming. So from my vantage point as a co-chair, that really is kind of the prompter of the state price regulation issue. The task force capability to focus just on that issue obviously was diverted, but diverted in a very constructive way, because we have a chance to address issues that we've all been struggling with in a really hopeful way with the availability of the federal funding. So we're still keeping track of the price regulation issue, but we're doing a whole lot more at the same time. Okay, so with that backdrop, next slide, Linda. So to just fill in a little bit more on the DFR report, they did not take as they say, a strong position on the federal order program, but they did say that, kind of the conventional wisdom that changing the pricing formulas is at issue here. So we're looking for an independent review of the federal pricing structure by a well-informed agency of the government that is not involved in the milk business. And they came out with the conventional understanding that the current pricing formula is not serviceable. So it's an important finding to highlight, I think. Then I thought that's very useful they put together, they have their own summary of the different issues that they looked at in terms of pricing. So to just highlight those again, they did a really good comprehensive review of the different issues that are involved in all this. Leaving the first one off for the moment, whether the state can do something, that was their direct charge. They also looked at the viability of going back to a compact. They spent a fair amount of time looking at supply management, the alternative of organic, and then where the market is kind of heading in innovation and farm management. So I do think that the primary contribution of the DFR report is the first one. They added the idea that is there some role that the state can play in terms of risk management and hedging. So that the task force, I think, is well informed with all of the other issues, but not particularly well informed with risk management and hedging. So going into our work, we did spend some planning time to make sure that we address that additional issue that they had provided. On the state milk marketing order side, I think it's helpful to highlight, number one, that the independent review did confirm that the industry is now using the majority of its milk in state. They came up with 58% of raw milk is now being used by Vermont milk plants. So instead of 90% of Vermont raw milk going out of state, DFR found that basically 60% of the milk is being used in state. So Roger and I did a private review using public information and came out about the same place. And DFR comes back with access to information from the agency, and the federal government comes up with 60%. So that's confirmation of a very important point. The other thing,
Dan, could I just on that point, I a few years ago, I remember you saying it was closer to 3/4. Do you attribute that to just better data or a change? Or, I mean, it's good numbers, don't get me wrong, but I'm just curious.
well, number one, I was fishing for a range. The 3/4 is actually the utilization of the milk by the plants. And there is some milk coming from out of state. So I had something on the order of 2/3, give or take, in-state supply to produce plants that's 3/4 to produce the ice cream and the butter and powder. So if all 100% was Vermont milk, then it'd be 3/4. You follow me?
That makes sense. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. And we'll get into that a little bit, what we found with the task force. So the DFR only looked at what Maine is doing and what Pennsylvania is doing, which is a state price regulation of in-state milk use for in-state consumption of finished product, which is kind of the basic model of what an in-state price regulation would do, other than what California did. What California did was use all their milk in state to produce products that get sold out of state. And that's a big difference. The products, so the equivalent is Ben & Jerry's ice cream gets sold mostly out of state. Cabot cheese gets sold mostly out of state. So the issue is, can you regulate the price of the milk, Vermont milk, that's used to produce a product that's sold out of state? And DFR did not address that issue specifically. So that issue was still on the table after the DFR report for the task force to undertake. So next slide, Linda. So based on what we got from DFR and all of the surrounding changes to what the task force really had to do, we went to work. And as Mike and Bobby said, we heard from over 50 witnesses. What we're really trying to do is build a complete picture that's fill out all of the details, as Mike described, of what the Vermont dairy industry looks like. And use that as the record to decide what to do with the backdrop that primarily we started out looking for price regulation, but now we were really looking to how can we best use the infrastructure and the pandemic assistance money that's coming from the federal government. And I think that the testimony in that regard did three things. First, we confirmed again that the industry is configured as an in-state, very well-established in-state dairy industry of producing high quality, high valued manufactured dairy products. And if you look over on the right side, actually, the federal order statistics identify 65% of the milk that's pooled under the federal order, of the Vermont milk that's pooled under the federal order, is utilized in the state of Vermont. So it's actually 2/3 pooled milk. And that doesn't include the milk that's being used for the non-pool milk to make artisan cheese, ice cream, and the like. So it's more than 65%, not a whole lot more, but it's more than 65%. So we now know that 2/3 of the milk produced in Vermont is utilized by Vermont companies as a verified fact. So that the testimony that's kind of the benchmark for the basic charge to the task force going in and coming out. That's a very important number in all this. So that's number one. But I think not quite 1A, but 2 and 2A, we heard that labor problems and milk transportation problems are now starting to really be basic reasons that farm viability is threatened in the state of Vermont, in addition to pricing. So we didn't just hear, which we have over the years, price. We need to get paid more. The price is too volatile. Pricing is the problem. We also heard, if we can't figure out how to maintain a reliable labor source, labor help on the farm, we're not going to be able to keep the farm. And we also heard that the developing uncertainties in the milk hauling business is really becoming a problem. Over the years, there's always been an issue with the charges that farmers pay to have their milk picked up. But now we're hearing that the ability to have their milk picked up is becoming a real issue. So the picture of the market, the Vermont dairy industry marketplace, was altered, I think, a little bit by that testimony, filling out challenges that dairy farmers are facing. And hence the task force spent a fair amount of time in its proposals addressing those issues. And then the third thing is, as Mike said, we heard from the banking and side of the industry to get at the risk management and hedging concept that DFR had put on the table. And we found out that there are essentially 3 federal programs available to assist with hedging and pricing problems. One of them, the federal program that addresses the spread between farm feed costs and the pay price, that's been in 2 farm bills, is actually over the last couple of years paid $1.50 a hundredweight. So it's provided a substantial benefit. It's not really a risk management. It's really a backstop to the pricing problems. But $1.50 a hundredweight's a lot of money. And then there are 2 structured risk management programs offered through Farm Credit that are really undersubscribed. So we spent a fair amount of time incorporating that new concept into the idea of how the state can act to address the pricing issue, in addition to regulating the price directly. So I'd say those are the three additions that this task force record has added to the general record. And I would just again highlight that the more immediate focus of the task force became addressing how best to use the federal money for labor, for transportation. How can we, instead of struggling with those issues, we have the opportunity to address them directly if we can figure out how to direct the funding towards the problems. And Mike, after I'm done, maybe you can come back in and speak to the particulars of what the task force came up with each of those issues. And I'm almost done, and then you can do that. Last, down at the very bottom, Senator Brock raised the issue that if we were going to devote time and attention, and I think your committee is really going to be charged to do this, to figure out how best to direct the money, then there needs to be some cost benefit analysis done to make sure that the money is going to be spent to provide an actual benefit. The more I thought about Senator Brock's thoughts on that, it comes back to the task force started out looking at the industry without all this federal money involved. So we're trying to figure out what the problems are, and then along comes the money. Now we're trying to figure out how to spend the money to address the problems. And his point is, okay, if we're going to do that, we need to make sure that we do that in a financially prudent manner, which makes tremendous sense, and is part of the reason that in the conclusion, the task force asked for some more time to do what it's doing, so that we can, along with your committees, we can start to match up the programs we see as being necessary with the funding and begin to prioritize how the money can best be spent. So last point on the price regulation, to get back to where we kind of started, the testimony did disclose, as I said, the 65% of the milk is now being used in state. In addition, Chris, it really did confirm we're on the order of over 2 billion pounds of milk equivalent being used to produce ice cream, butter, powder, cheese, all the manufactured dairy products, plus the fluid milk that's produced in state, the beverage milk. And in addition to that, we got data from the federal order, which I think was a bit of a surprise to all of us that have been chewing on these numbers over the years. 85% of the milk is in state. So, and 15% is coming from out of state. So in other words, the 65% of Vermont's total raw milk supply, 65% of 2.7 billion pounds of milk, equates to 85% of the product supply that the milk plants are using. And so there's not much milk coming in from out of state at this point. The other 15% is basically coming from New York State. So essentially you have an in-state market with a pretty substantial manufacturing capacity and a pretty substantial supply capacity for that production. So that's now we have real numbers that we can work with to try to figure out what to do. On the other hand, the legal issues still remain because they really have yet to be addressed. So we now have the information that we need to ask the legal questions precisely. So we're now in the process of trying to find, the task force directed that we find an outside law professor to give us an independent assessment, legal opinion, about using the in-state milk to produce products that are sold out of state. Is there an interstate commerce issue with the fact that the products are sold out of state? And I've been going through all of my longstanding connections in the law professor world on dormant commerce clause. I'm on my third law professor now because they're busy. But I think I have found the person that can do this. Famous last words, I think, that I found him. And I'm talking to him today at 3 o'clock, and we'll find out if I'm right. And if I am, then I'll be back to you folks and to Mike, and hopefully we can get him on the task. So I think we've made substantial progress. This is a complicated issue. We now have a good picture of the market to present the legal question, and hopefully we found somebody that can address the legal question. It's going to take some time, so we've asked again for some more time to undertake that next piece of this. And then, obviously, if it turns out it is legal, we still have to figure out whether and how we can do it. As we talked about at the hearing, and I think Senator Collmore, you asked me, essentially just because we have the legal authority doesn't mean you can use it. You got to figure out how to use it, even if you have it. And that, I think, is where the task force is on this. Final thought on my end, and then I'll tap back to Michael, is the other long-term, I think, structural change that the task force addressed is, can we find a way to increase or develop new capacity for production in Vermont? So now that we know that something on the order of 1.7 billion, something like that, is used in state of the raw milk, and the capacity, existing capacity, is 2.1. So if all the Vermont milk went into those plants, then there's something on the order of 600 million pounds of milk that's leaving the state in that best of all possible world scenario. So we're really not talking about a whole lot of additional capacity. We already have quite a bit of capacity in the state. So what does that look like? Task force just began to kind of shape that out. Cabot testified, the folks from Agrimark testified that Cabot's basically, their plant capacity, other than the labor issue they're facing, is running at capacity. And if they had more capacity, they could sell more cheese. So does it make sense to assist Cabot with expanding existing capacity? Or does it make sense to build a new plant? So that's where the discussion got to. And so we need to revisit that issue. So I guess I would suggest that Mike come back through and talk to what I have on the left side there: infrastructure, transportation and labor, and succession planning with the details of that.
Yeah, there any questions from committee members at this point in regards to what Dan reported, or Michael up to his last presentation? Anthony, you're muted, Anthony.
Sorry about that. Hi, Dan. You've already talked about this, but I need to mull it over in a way. But because of the in-state, so much of the milk being in-state, used in-state, how does that relate to what goes on in Maine, where they are able to do the over-order pricing for Maine milk because it's all used in the state? Is that the case?
Yeah, that's
how does that relate? How does these new numbers relate to, like, if we wanted to do something like Maine does?
okay. So yeah, you're right. Maine is in this unusual market position that they're tucked away in the corner with Canada to the one side and the ocean to the other, and it's difficult to move milk through Boston to get to Maine. So they have a pretty insular industry. Plus, they have the two milk plants that are pretty good capacity milk plants. So most of their, pretty close to all, but not quite, all of their milk goes into those two milk plants in Portland. And just, by the way the world fits together, the equivalent output of those plants equals the consumption of fluid milk by the population of the state. So production, processing, and consumption all line up. So they can basically regulate what they're producing because it's in effect being consumed in state. That's the main model. And if I would just say that Pennsylvania they make way more milk than they consume, but they've pieced off that equivalent amount of what they consume in state, and that's what they regulate. So those are the two models there. The difference is California. What California consumes a lot, but they only they produce like 6 times as much milk as they consume. And so they built a manufactured products industry out of that surplus milk. And all of those manufactured products were sold out of state. So the California state order for almost 50 years was regulating the in-state procurement of milk to make products that went out of state, in addition to the fluid milk that was used in state. So those are the different patterns. Vermont fits the California pattern, not the Maine pattern. We only utilize the equivalent of between 10 and 15% for the manufacture and processing of products consumed in state. So 85 to 90% of the products, the ice cream, the powder, the cheese, goes out of state. So we're not equivalent to Maine in that sense. We're equivalent to California, and that's the issue.
Right.
Yeah, the big issue is that I think we're very fortunate that we have as much manufacturing as we do have here. And like Cabot, like they said, that they utilize all their production, and they could even increase that if they had the ability to, either with more labor and more modernization or an expansion. I think we've done everything right in the past about building these niche markets with the product that our farmers are producing, but it's never trickled down to the farm, the level. It's, the money's all disappeared before it ever gets to the farmer. And so I think, we're in a good position as far as having all this manufacturing. The only thing we need to do is figure out a way to capture a little bit of that money to get it back to the farm. So Mike, did you have more to add?
Well, if the committee wants me to, I can go through some of the specifics in the recommendations for infrastructure, labor, transportation, purchasing, and business assistance and succession planning.
Well, we've heard quite a bit about the importance of succession planning and a lot of those things, but I guess it would be good if you could run through those issues, and we've got plenty of time.
Sure. So as we discussed previously this morning, there's an unprecedented amount of federal funds coming in, and much of that is going to be available for infrastructure. And as you know, the Agency of Agriculture has several legislatively authorized infrastructure programs, working lands being one, the capital assistance program being another. So one of the recommendations of the task force is to explore using the federal funds to enhance the existing programs for capital assistance. There are examples in the report such as providing better milking systems for smaller farms so that they can store more milk and reduce the number of truck trips to the farm every day, which not only has a benefit for the farm, but it also has a climate change benefit in reducing greenhouse gases. Another is improving farm driveways and farm roads. There was testimony that milk haulers often have difficulty accessing a farm because of the state of a farm driveway or farm road. And potentially you could create a program to assist farms in improving them, or push that money through an A&R program for roadside improvement. for driveways and ditches, and that would have a water quality benefit, as well as benefiting the farm and the milk hauler who needs to access the farm. There was also, with regard to infrastructure, a recommendation that you pursue a model similar to what you did with the READY program, the Rural Economic Development Program, of funding grant writers that are available to farms and farm businesses to help them access the funds that are available to them. As you remember, you set up a dairy assistance program a couple of years ago, and it wasn't fully utilized because of concern from the farming community about the difficulty of the application, et cetera. These programs that are going to be funded by the federal funds coming in, they're going to have application processes. They're going to have some difficulty. It's going to be time consuming. So maybe one of the recommendations is to fund grant writers like you did for READY to help farms and farm businesses access the funds that will be available. With regard to transportation, one of the recommendations, or one of the issues, it's a perennial issue, is hauling cost, and the cost that it imposes on farms, and specifically small farms. And it can be significant. It can be 75 cents per hundredweight. And for 100 cows, that's basically $2,500 per month. 150 cows, it's $3,500 per month. And it can go up depending on things such as stop charges and location adjustments. So hauling is a significant cost, and one of the recommendations of the task force is to explore ways to mitigate that cost or shift it, with the caveat that they know that this discussion has been had in the past, and it's a difficult issue. Another issue with regard to transportation is highway weights. There was testimony that Vermont's highway weight limits are not conforming with surrounding states, which creates issues with processors not being able to implement the most efficient routes for their pickups and or deliveries, because they have to switch out for Vermont specific trucks. So one of the recommendations is amending the highway weight limit so that they conform with neighboring states in order to make hauling and deliveries more efficient and help reduce costs. You've heard
Chris,
from
Chris
Michael,
had
sorry.
a question.
Yeah. Michael, can you just square what those two pieces, the cost of hauling and the road weights, makes sense, but doesn't really square with the idea, or at least help me understand. We are also celebrating that we use most of our milk locally, our raw milk locally. So, compared to a farm in New York that's shipping further, presumably our hauling costs are lower. So those two concerns seem incongruous. Can you just help me understand, or has this just always been a problem?
I mean, to an extent, the assessment of the hauling charges to the farmer has always been a problem. And if you think of other industries, other economies, it's probably one of the few where the supplier of the product also has to pay to ship the product to the person that's purchasing it, right? And so it's something of a unique model, and it's unique because of the relationship the farm has with the co-op, the entity buying the product. And that's where the difficulty comes in, because if you try to shift the hauling costs from the farmer, there are consequences to that effectively, and it may not result in your intended result. Now, as to
Can I just come in a little bit behind to Chris's question? What the co-op does in what you described there, Chris, so the New York farmer, let's say hypothetically shipping milk to the Cabot plant 3 times the distance. The co-op, I mean, that's an issue for the co-op with all of its milk. There's milk going 400 miles and there's milk going 10 miles. So they're marketing the milk as a common service to all the members. And they have this equation basically where the producers pay a certain amount and equally, your basic charge. And this is like going to be 2/3 right, but it's basically the idea. So then for a farmer that's remote, he's not, or she is not paying the full amount. They're taking some element of that and laying it off on the membership as a whole, so that it's, there are some costs to farmer A that are greater, and they try to feather it in so that they can work on behalf of the membership as a whole. So, whether that is equitable, functional, open question. The market order program always served the function with proprietary handlers, same issue for a proprietary handler. And so the market order was a big function of the market order until recently. Now the co-ops own the plants. The market order doesn't look at what the co-ops are doing, supplying their own plants. So you don't have the federal oversight that you used to have to make sure that it was an equitable pricing program. So you got 2 different problems really playing into, and it gets quite complicated.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay.
Thanks.
So the next issue is labor. You've been hearing about the labor market across the state and all sectors. It's seriously affecting the farming economy as well. Concerns were raised about availability of labor for dairy processing plants and warehouses and on the farm. The task force has some recommendations. One of the issues is finding people that have CDLs that can drive the milk trucks or the delivery from the processor to the retail or wholesale. So there is a CDL assistance program at the Department of Labor. The task force recommended that the relevant legislative committees explore ways to enhance that program or promote its availability, including things like potential bonuses or additional financing for those participants committing the drive for a milk hauler or dairy processor. The Horizon Task Force, I haven't read their report yet, but just their press on it. They're recommending something similar, basically a scholarship program for CDLs for milk haulers. One of the other recommendations of the task force is regarding housing or bonuses for those who are working in the dairy industry. So you all know housing, affordable housing is short supply. The task force recommends exploring the possibility of providing incentives such as housing to attract labor for Vermont farms or dairy processors, or collaborating with dairy processing companies to establish things like high school programs to provide after school work for students. This provides students with needed work experience and helps transition them from part-time work to full-time work in the dairy processing plant. And then similar to the high school program would be apprenticeship programs. There are 1 or 2 national apprenticeship programs that try to match people who are looking to enter the farming industry with farms or older farmers to help those individuals that are the apprentice gain permanent or gain experience, transition into the industry, and potentially succeed an older farmer in taking over the operation of their farm. The state could provide assistance to persons interested in entering apprenticeship programs. Funding would obviously depend on the number of participants and the type of programs, or the state could establish its own apprenticeship program to help draw people from away into the industry. The last couple of years, you've been talking about purchasing by schools and purchasing by state institutions. You reviewed a bill to try to provide an incentive for schools to buy local. The task force has concern that even though there's state statute that directs state agencies to purchase local food, all other concerns being equal, that state agencies are not buying Vermont products in the scope and amount that they should be. Similarly, schools and what they are buying, why they are buying out-of-state products. The task force recommends exploring incentives that can be provided to increase state or school purchasing of Vermont milk and other dairy products, similar to what you were exploring previously. Dan's already touched on the processing capacity and the recommendation by the task force to either find existing capacity in the state or somehow work with others to bring another dairy processing plant to the state. I won't go into that further. And then for business assistance and succession planning, all know the farm viability program at the HCB and how it provides business financial and succession planning to farm and far sector businesses. Basically, what the task force is recommending is that additional funds be appropriated to the program to ensure that dairy farmers have access to these technical services for succession and transfer. This need might be increasing as the age of dairy farmers, average age of dairy farmers increases over the next 5 to 10 years. Additionally, maybe reaching out to the Vermont Bar Association so that they could provide legal resources for some of these farms that need to plan for their transition or their retirement. And then there's a recommendation to maybe build some flexibility into the viability program, because sometimes a farmer might not mesh well with the technical service provider that's assigned from the HCB, and maybe they can, if they have an ongoing relationship with someone, maybe they can work with that person instead of the person they conflict with. So that's a possibility as well. And honestly, the last recommendation is to extend the task force's authority. As you heard Dan discuss, some of the long-term recommendations need additional legal analysis, need further review by the task force after that legal analysis is completed. And the task force is currently scheduled to expire on March 1st, 2022. And that additional time would be necessary for them to complete the legal analysis and review. So there's a proposal to extend the task force's authority until February 1, 2023.
Thank you, Michael. I think one thing that hasn't been mentioned is the task force was recommending the state to participate in covering the insurance cost on a per hundredweight basis. And our findings, I thought in our meetings, were it would cost like 15 cents a hundredweight to cover that insurance. but the return was like $1.57 or something like that to the farmer, which is a pretty good bang for the buck. And if we took some of this federal money to cover these premiums, the farmer would basically get the 57 cents, or would have, plus wouldn't have been paying out the 15 cents. So it'd be like $1.75, and which is a pretty good return for spending 15 cents. I don't know if either of you want to talk about that.
I would, that's the direct response to the DFR finding recommendation on hedging. And we spent quite a bit of time on that. So Mike and I both, we didn't get to that. And so thank you for flagging that, Bobby. And I think the other reason to highlight it is that there is the opportunity for the legislature to cover 2 years. And it's not quite clear whether the legislature needs to act relatively quickly to cover the first of the 2 years. So I would recommend you follow up with that particular issue relatively quickly. Maybe it's the first thing out of the task force report for the committee to address is the margin coverage protection program premium for the state to take up the premiums for that program. Go after that one pretty quickly, Bobby.
Yeah, we figured. Go ahead, Michael.
I would note that we would not be the first. Vermont would not be the first state to do this. That the task force heard testimony that other states, most notably Virginia and Maryland, were already doing this for enrollment in dairy margin coverage.
And I think, I mean, I haven't got the report right here in front of me, but I think it was going to cost like $4 million or something in that neighborhood to cover the.
It's three.
The 15.
It's three if all the farmers opt in. The most it would cost it appears to be $3 million roughly.
3.
Yeah.
And the return on that would be thousands, hundreds of, well, it'd be up in the millions actually.
Yeah, and I think it's, yes, many millions.
So that's one quick short-term issue that would help get farmers quite a lot more money. And we figured overall that they were usually short about $3 a hundredweight from breaking even. And this would be over half of that loss in this one movement that we could make fairly quick. So anyway, Brian, you had a question.
Thank you, Bobby. And I just want to say to Dan and Bobby, who were the co-chairs, thank you very much for your hard work, and Michael for being part of it as well. A lot of information today. I really appreciated Dan's remarks concerning both the labor and the transportation issues, because as I think we all need to remember, this is one-time money that is coming from the federal government. It's probably a poor analogy, but it's kind of like being a 5-year-old kid and having Uncle Sam give you $5 and say, this is all you're going to get now. And seeing the kid run in and buy every candy bar he can buy in the candy store and eating it, and then he's all done and there's nothing else. So I think it is very, very important that we do always remember that we need to set up structural changes. Some of the capital improvements that you talked about, to me, make a lot of sense about new equipment for additional processing, the driveway at the farm, all that's sustainable, and that is a structural change that I think makes a lot of sense. Some of the other ones I'm not so much sold on yet, but certainly I think we do need to allow the task force some extra time, because I think the most important job you have is still to be done, and that's to decide how to allocate the funding that's coming. So thank you guys very, very much. This is a great I feel a lot better about where we are than I did when we started talking about this a year or so ago. Thank you.
Anthony?
It's just a quick thought about, well, actually, I want your quick thoughts. What's the advantage of having additional processing in the state? Like if there was another dairy plant, for example, does it mean that more of the milk would stay in the state? Because we're still talking about a lot of the milk, the products going out of the state. So I just wonder if you could sort of tell me in a shortness, like, what's the benefit of putting another milk plant online?
Yeah, good question. If it's, if the numbers prove out 600 million pounds of milk basically going out of state, Anthony,
Yeah,
some of that's going for fluid. So not much advantage to capturing that in state because the fluid market's a good market.
right.
And Vermont's supplying a good out-of-state market. So let's say it's half, 300 million pounds, right? That's likely what's going in the powder plant in West Springfield. Not a whole lot, right? Vermont's not, by all accounts, including Agrimark's own testimony, none of our milk is going in the powder plant, but it looks like some is going, not a whole lot, but some. That's the milk. If we can capture that and use it for a higher value product than powder, then it stays in state and it's used for a higher value product, better return for everybody.
Okay, thanks.
The powder plant is it's a loser. It's a loser, and we aren't blessed with a lot of extra milk, but that extra milk would be a lot better if it was going to Cabot and made into butter or cheese or yogurt down in Brattleboro. It would just make more sense to utilize that milk into something where you make some money and not have to sell it tomorrow. Butter you can keep, yogurt you can keep. These products will hang around for a while and give you a chance to get a decent return on your product.
But it also means, it has to mean that there's a market for those other products as well. You're saying we're going to take what goes into powder and put it into yogurt or cheese or ice cream. That implies that there's a market for them. I'm not saying there isn't. I think there probably is, but it means there has to be a market for those other products.
Absolutely. But as I said, Agrimark's economist said they're at capacity other than the labor problem now with the Cabot plant in Middlebury. So if they have more capacity, they could sell more cheese. They did testify to that.
So the capacity means you're using up the capacity space in their plant, not in the consumer marketplace.
Correct. Plant capacity.
But they did also testify that they're selling every bit that they can possibly make.
Yeah. They're saying if they had more plant capacity, they could sell more cheese. That's what they testified.
That's pretty important.
Yeah. But qualified that they've got a labor issue and they're not running at full capacity right now.
Sure.
So, yeah. Bobby, if I could just, I have a question and a final thought. To Senator Collimore's point, the prudent use of the federal funding is front and center here. And the more information we can have about the availability of that federal money and how it's allocated to be used, the better for all of us. And so, one thing we didn't really address in the task force is some knowledge base of trying to develop a knowledge base of where the money is and how it can be spent. Mike described how we talked about an ombudsperson to help farmers with their individual applications, but this is the state. We got to figure out how the state's going to use this money. I would hope that the legislature somehow would develop its own capacity a knowledge base of where that money is and how it can be spent over the next couple of years to be available to people, looking to figure out programs like this task force. So that, and nothing against the administration, but not just have us only be relying on the executive branch with regard to how that money can be spent as part of their budget process. And my question is for Mike, is the report, when will the report be posted, Mike, so that it's available to the public?
I just need to send it to the posting address, and they'll probably be posted sometime this afternoon.
Afternoon, okay, thanks.
And I can also send it to Linda, and she can post it on the committee's website.
Thanks.
So are there any other questions? I'm wondering, as chair of the committee, our Senate committee, if we should ask Michael if he could draft up, have a draft of a bill that would like do that coverage for the insurance premiums. Would we do it, just a draft bill on that, Mike, for us?
Well, the report does include draft legislation, and it does include language that would provide assistance for the risk management programs. What's not there is an appropriation for the program. That would probably be an important aspect of it.
Yeah. Well, see, we really kind of need something to work off from if we were going to pursue that line of thinking. I think we have the sign up date. They extended that for farmers for this next year into the spring, I think.
No, it's to February, Bobby.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, it's like the middle of February. They don't have to put up their money until the spring, but they have to sign up for the program by February. So I think what you need to do is, if you're going to do this, with enough time to let the farm community know that the state is picking up the premiums, because then you'll likely get more participation, obviously, out of the farmers if they know that they're not on the hook for the premiums. They're more likely to sign up. So.
Yeah. Boy.
So I can put in a request for a committee bill and put the risk mitigation language into that individually or independent from what's in the report. And you could have that to work on tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, any comment from committee members?
No, I'd like to see that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to see it too.
Yeah.
I'd like to see it.
I think Corey's already looking at it.
There has to be a way to continue to have continual funding for it, though. I mean, it's one thing to say we're going to put up the money for the year or whatever, 2 years, but I don't think people buy into the idea that we're going to put up the money every year forever.
No, I think, we ought to do the 2 years until the new farm bill comes out, because that could change, language in the new farm bill could change everything.
Yeah.
So the max would be this year and next year. For 20.
So on the one hand, if I'm a farmer and you're gonna pick up my bill for the premium, you're gonna save me $2, but I'm gonna make $100 because of that. Is there a way that you then make me give you back, $2?
I don't. I guess you could do that, but
I
the way
think
I look at it-
that's going to be a question for the bankers and the insurers. I think we need to look at the conditions on the award of the funds. That's what I would think we would need to look at.
Yeah, and see, once we get a draft, then you could look at Virginia and the other states to see how they made out using their federal funds to cover that premium. But it's what I liked about the idea from a legislator's point of view. we were spending 15 cents and getting $1.50. So you were multiplying your expenditure by like 10 times for the return. Well, there's not many places we get a 10 times return on money we spend. And it, it would make quite a difference in the farmers' milk checks if they got that kind of a return on.
Sure.
Bobby, I just, just to be clear, it's a hedging strategy. If milk prices recover, so that there is some possibility that it wouldn't pay anything, and that's why farmers don't sign up. They don't want to take the risk. So the state would have some risk of not getting that return. But if you don't get that return, then that means that the milk price is recovered. So it's over the 5-year period, it's paid $1.50. Some years, last year, it paid tremendous amount of money. In the previous years, less. So.
Yeah, it fluctuates with the difference between the price of milk and the cost of feed. And but anyway, we can get that drafted up, and then we'll have something on paper to look at and fool with. Any other questions for Dan or Michael?
Nope.
If not, thanks, guys. Thank you, Dan, for the presentation. Dan's put quite a lot of time in. You still working on their donating your time, Dan?
Still, I haven't even put in for my meetings yet. I think I'm going to do that though. I think I'll get the meeting money out of it.
Well, we'll check that time out that you put in.
Well,
You. No, it was a long.
Mike and I are going to do this again with the House Committee next week. So, thanks for helping us with the dry run, and we'll make sure to emphasize more the premium program, so they'll be a little more up to speed on the bill when it comes up.
Yeah,
Excellent.
well, Dan and Michael have spent a lot of time on this when we weren't meeting, getting ready for the next meeting. So if there's no other business before the committee, I guess we could adjourn